How did Hushai's advice to Absalom differ from Ahithophel's concerning how to kill David? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Samuel on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 2 Samuel chapter 17, verses 1 to 14. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Samuel chapter 17, beginning at verse 1. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Now let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, and make him afraid. And all the people who are with him will flee, and I will strike only the king. Then I will bring back all the people to you. When all return except the man whom you seek, all the people will be at peace." And the saying pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, "Now call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he says too." And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom spoke to him, saying, "Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up." So Hushai said to Absalom, The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. For, said Hushai, you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are enraged in their minds, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field, and your father is a man of war, and will not camp with the people. Surely by now he is hidden in some pit or in some other place, and it will be, when some of them are overthrown at the first, that whoever hears it will say, There is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. And even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt completely. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Therefore I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea for the multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground. And of him and all the men who are with him there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we will pull it into the river until there is no one small stone found there." So Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel." For the Lord had a purpose to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Absalom. David is on the run from Absalom, with Absalom having executed a successful coup against his father. David is likely moving along the ascent of Adumim, a route from Jerusalem to Jericho, seeing as how he said in chapter 15 that he would wait in the plains of the wilderness. Later on in this chapter, we will find David crossing over the Jordan towards Mahanaim, hence one of the reasons that we conclude that David escaped Jerusalem this way and came to the place near where Jericho would have been. At the end of the last chapter, we had Ahithophel give Absalom advice to sleep with his father's concubines that were left behind, and to do so openly, for in doing so the people would see that Absalom was really the king, as the harem of the king was generally given to the control of the next king when the next king was installed. It also had the added benefit of making Absalom despised in his father's eyes, with Ahithophel believing this would prevent David from pardoning Absalom for his treachery while executing him. Coming to chapter 18, we find that Ahithophel also gave Absalom advice concerning his father. Even though this advice is separated by a chapter break, it appears that it was given at the same time as the advice from the end of chapter 16. Thus Ahithophel's advice came in two parts, one for Absalom to execute and one for Ahithophel to execute. This advice would come soon after Absalom arrived in Jerusalem, for Ahithophel's advice about defeating David is predicated on the fact that David is not yet far away, nor has he been able to regroup. What Ahithophel advised then was for him to take a contingent of 12,000 soldiers, hunt David that night, take him by surprise, kill David, causing the rest of David's men to flee. Ahithophel believed that this would work because David was weak, weary, and afraid, and thus not be able to best defend himself in battle. And on its face, this sounded like good advice. We don't know exactly how many men fled with David, but it is quite likely that 12,000 would have been more than enough to do the job. And we know that David's spirit is in a state of despair, seeing as how he allowed himself to be mistreated by Shimei. And with Ahithophel knowing David so well, having advised him for years, this was good advice that Absalom should have heeded. It would be relatively quick and painless. It would require nothing of Absalom, and it would solidify Absalom as king, quashing any counter-rebellion that David might have been able to form. By saying that it was good advice, we're not talking about morally good, for Ahithophel was advising the murder of the Lord's anointed. However, from a military and political standpoint, this was good advice. But for whatever reason, perhaps as a loyalty test, Absalom brought Hushai, David's friend and covert spy, in to seek his advice too. Hushai was told what Ahithophel had said, and Absalom wanted to know his opinion. And so Hushai gave it. He said that Ahithophel's advice was not good this time. In saying it this way, he acknowledged that Ahithophel is known for good advice, but nobody's perfect. And as a friend of David, Hushai could give him better advice than even David's former advisor could. Hushai goes on to tell Absalom that Ahithophel's advice is predicated on the assumption that David is weak and can easily be caught by surprise. However, Hushai points to David's history as a man of war, a man who fought wars for almost half a century by this point, and so he shouldn't be regarded as someone who is weak. He says that by now David is probably hidden in some cave somewhere and wouldn't be caught even if Ahithophel found David's men. Moreover, David's men that are with him are not weaklings either, and so when Ahithophel's men find them, many will be defeated. And when word of that gets out, the people who might have sided with Absalom will lose heart, believing that Absalom cannot be a good and wise king after all. Instead, Hushai tells Absalom that he needs to raise an army that includes all Israel. They need to go and overwhelm David's men, bringing down cities if David flees into them. Absalom should lead this army to show himself to be a mighty warrior and the valiant leader that Israel needs. In other words, Hushai's advice, which too sounded good on the surface, fed into Absalom's ego, which we know from previous chapters was already heavily inflated. The issue with Hushai's advice, that was overlooked by Absalom, is that raising such an army would take time. And in that time, if David is as strong and cunning as Hushai says he is, it would allow David to prepare a strong counteroffensive. But Absalom liked Hushai's advice, likely due to the fact that it depended on his ego, and it appeared he wanted to take it. Neither Hushai's or Ahithophel's advice was necessarily bad advice. Both plans could have theoretically worked, but we also find out one more thing here. The Lord was behind the rejection of Ahithophel's advice. Now by this I do not mean to say that Hushai was necessarily inspired, but recall from chapter 15 that David prayed that Ahithophel's advice come to foolishness. Well, this is God answering David's prayer. God can work through people, even non-miraculously, to bring about his purpose. Hushai wanted to protect David, and so God used Hushai for that purpose. Absalom had a high opinion of himself, and so God used that against Absalom in order to punish Absalom for his own sins. All of this led to Ahithophel's advice being rejected, Ahithophel being a traitor in his own right, thus bringing about the desires of David's prayer and protecting David from death in the process. And lest we forget, I believe that though God allowed David to be overthrown here, he did not intend for David to die, for that was not the punishment for his sin with Bathsheba. The rest was, but death wasn't. Thus God was going to use these events to protect David by using Hushai for his purpose. While the army was being assembled, that is when Absalom would have slept with David's concubines, thus tying the events chronologically together. But an army is being raised, and David needs to be warned. That is what we will be discussing, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. So we invite you back for that. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Samuel chapter 17, verses 15 to 29, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.